I never expected the words that would change everything to come from my own mother. "You don't deserve that money." She said this about my grandfather's inheritance, money he left specifically to me. What happened next taught my entire family a lesson about respect they'll never forget. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from. And if you've ever received treatment from your family that you didn't deserve, don't forget to hit that like button. Trust me, the ending of this story will surprise you in ways you can't imagine. My name is Emma, I'm 28 years old, and I work as a marketing director in Boston. But this story isn't about my job, it's about my family. More specifically, it's about how my family never understood me, while my grandfather always supported me through everything. My grandfather, Robert Henderson, was 72 years old, a retired mechanical engineer who had built an empire from nothing. He started with a small machine shop in 1975 and turned it into Henderson Engineering Solutions, a company that designed parts for aerospace and automotive industries. By the time he retired in 2018, the company employed over 200 people and was worth millions. But his real wealth wasn't in his bank account, it was in his character. He always said, "Emma, money should be a tool that builds dreams, not a goal that destroys relationships." In my family, I was the forgotten middle child. My older sister Jennifer is 32, married to a real estate agent named Tom, and they have 2 children, Sophie, 8, and Michael, 6. Jennifer had always been the golden child, homecoming queen in high school, sorority president in college, and now the perfect suburban mom with her Pinterest-worthy home and Instagram-ready family photos. My younger brother Mark is 25, a communications major who graduated from college 2 years ago and has been finding himself ever since. He's tried everything from being a social media influencer to starting a podcast about conspiracy theories. Currently, he's pursuing his dream of becoming a musician, which mostly involves playing guitar in coffee shops for tips and living in our parents' basement. My mother, Margaret, 58, has been a housewife since Jennifer was born. She spent her days managing the household, volunteering at church, and orchestrating elaborate family gatherings where appearances mattered more than authenticity. My father, David, 61, runs a small accounting firm that he inherited from his father. It's a modest business that provides a comfortable middle-class lifestyle, but nothing like the wealth my grandfather had accumulated. Growing up, I quickly learned the family hierarchy. Jennifer's achievements were celebrated with family dinners, photo albums, and endless bragging to neighbors. When she made cheerleader in 7th grade, my parents threw a party. When she got accepted to her first-choice college, they bought her a new car. When she got engaged, my mother cried tears of joy and immediately started planning a $30,000 wedding. Mark's accomplishments, no matter how small, were treated like Nobel Prize wins. When he learned to tie his shoes, my father called it advanced motor skills. When he passed his driving test on the 3rd try, they celebrated with his favorite restaurant. When he graduated college with a 2.8 GPA, they acted like he'd achieved academic excellence. My achievements, however, were met with lukewarm acknowledgement at best. When I made the honor roll every semester in high school, it was expected. When I was accepted to MIT with a partial scholarship, my mother's first response was, "That's nice, dear, but don't you think you should focus on finding a nice young man to settle down with?" When I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in marketing and business administration, the family dinner conversation focused on Jennifer's pregnancy announcement. But my grandfather was different. He saw me, really saw me. I remember being 8 years old, sitting in his workshop while he tinkered with old engines. My siblings found it boring, but I was fascinated by how he could take something broken and make it work again. "You've got an engineer's mind, Emma," he told me, wiping grease from his hands. "You see problems as puzzles to solve, not obstacles to avoid." Throughout my childhood, while my parents were busy documenting Jennifer's every move and cheering Mark's mediocre efforts, my grandfather was quietly investing in my future. He bought me science kits and math workbooks. He taught me about compound interest and showed me how to read stock market reports. When I was 12, he opened a savings account in my name and taught me about budgeting. "Most people work for money," he explained during one of our Saturday morning visits to his office. "Smart people make money work for them. But the smartest people use money to create value for others." In high school, while my classmates were focused on social media and shopping, I was studying business cases and reading biographies of successful entrepreneurs. My grandfather encouraged this, often giving me books about innovative thinkers and problem solvers. Knowledge is the only investment that always pays dividends, he would say. When it came time for college applications, my family's true colors showed more clearly than ever. Jennifer had chosen a state school with a strong social scene and an easy communications program. My parents were thrilled. She'll meet a nice husband and have beautiful children, my mother gushed. I, on the other hand, was applying to top-tier schools with rigorous academic programs. When I got accepted to MIT, Northwestern, and the University of Chicago, my grandfather was bursting with pride. He framed my acceptance letters and hung them in his office. My parents, however, seemed almost disappointed. MIT is so far away, my mother complained. And it's so technical. What about State University? Jennifer had such a wonderful social experience there. Technical skills pay the bills, Margaret, my grandfather interjected. Emma's going to change the world. But the real test came when it was time to pay for college. My parents had set aside some money for education, but when the bills came due, there were suddenly other priorities. Jennifer needed help with her wedding expenses. Mark's car needed major repairs. The house needed a new roof. Somehow, my education fund kept getting redistributed for family emergencies. My grandfather quietly stepped in. "How much do you need for the full 4 years?" he asked during a private conversation. "I don't want to be a burden, Grandpa. I can take out loans." "Nonsense. Education is an investment in the future. Consider this my investment in you." He paid my full tuition, room, and board for 4 years. "Not as a loan, but as a gift. This stays between us," he said. "I don't want your parents feeling bad about their financial situation." I excelled at MIT, not just academically but also in practical applications. I started a small consulting business helping local companies with their marketing strategies. By my senior year, I was earning enough to cover my personal expenses and even save money. My grandfather was my biggest cheerleader, always asking about my latest projects and clients. Meanwhile, Jennifer was struggling to finish her degree while planning her elaborate wedding. Mark was changing majors for the 3rd time, adding extra semesters to his college career. Both were requiring increasing financial support from our parents, who were already stretched thin. After graduation, I moved to Boston and landed a position at a prestigious marketing firm. The salary was excellent, and I was able to rent a nice apartment in a good neighborhood. I was living the American dream, young, successful, and independent. My family's reaction to my success was complicated. They were proud, sort of, but also resentful. During family gatherings, conversations about my career were quickly redirected to Jennifer's children or Mark's latest creative endeavor. "Emma makes good money," my father would say, "but she's missing out on what really matters, family. All that education and she's still single," my mother would add with a sigh. "I just worry she's too focused on her career to find happiness." My grandfather, however, couldn't have been prouder. He would call me every Sunday to hear about my week, my projects, my goals. He understood my ambitions in a way my parents never could. "Success isn't about meeting other people's expectations," he told me during one of these calls. "It's about exceeding your own." 3 years into my career, I was promoted to senior account manager, then to team leader, and finally to marketing director. Each promotion came with increased responsibility, better compensation, and recognition from industry peers. I was invited to speak at conferences, quoted in trade publications, and headhunted by competitors. But with each success, the family dynamic became more strained. Jennifer, now struggling with the realities of suburban motherhood, began making snide comments about my selfish lifestyle. "Must be nice to have all that disposable income when you don't have real responsibilities," she would say. Mark, still living with our parents and working part-time jobs, became increasingly bitter about my financial independence. "Some people are just lucky," he would mutter when anyone mentioned my career achievements. My parents, caught between pride and resentment, settled on a narrative that minimized my accomplishments. "Emma's always been a hard worker," they would say, as if hard work alone explained everything, as if luck and family support had nothing to do with anyone's success. Only my grandfather saw the full picture. He understood the late nights, the difficult clients, the pressure to constantly prove myself in a competitive industry. He celebrated my wins and supported me through my challenges. Last year, I made the decision to start my own marketing agency. I had saved enough money for a substantial down payment, but I needed additional capital for office space, equipment, and initial operating expenses. The total startup cost was estimated at $75,000. When I shared my business plan with my family during our monthly dinner gathering, the reaction was predictably mixed. "Why would you leave a good-paying job to start over?" my father asked, reviewing my financial projections with the skepticism of someone who had never taken a significant business risk. "What if it fails?" my mother worried. "You'll lose everything you've worked for." Jennifer was more direct. "Sounds risky and selfish." "What about when you want to start a family? How will you manage a business and children?" Mark's response was typical. "Must be nice to have enough money to play entrepreneur. Some of us are still trying to pay off student loans." Only my grandfather asked the right questions. "What's your competitive advantage? Who's your target market? What's your growth strategy?" He listened to my answers with the attention of a serious investor, because that's exactly what he was considering becoming. "I'd like to invest in your company," he said after reviewing my business plan. "Not as a loan, but as a partnership. I believe in you, Emma." He invested $50,000 for a 10% stake in the company, giving me the capital I needed while keeping me as the majority owner. More importantly, he gave me something my family never had: absolute confidence in my abilities. "This is going to be successful because you're running it," he told me on the day we signed the partnership papers. "You have something your generation sometimes lacks: the patience to build something lasting." The business launch was more successful than I had dared to hope. Within 6 months, we had landed 3 major clients and were operating in the black. By the end of the first year, we had expanded to a team of 5 employees and were turning away potential clients because of capacity constraints. My grandfather was thrilled. He would visit the office regularly, not to check up on his investment, but to celebrate what we were building together. He loved meeting the team, hearing about new client wins, and seeing his faith in me validated. My family's reaction to the business success was more complex. They were proud in a way, but also seemed surprised, as if they hadn't really expected me to succeed. Worse, they began to view my success as a resource they could access. "Emma's doing so well with her little business," my mother would say to her friends, claiming vicarious pride while simultaneously diminishing the achievement. "Now that you're the boss, you must have flexible schedule," Jennifer would say, expecting me to be available for babysitting and family obligations at a moment's notice. Mark began making comments about family loans and asking if I needed any part-time help, despite having no relevant skills or experience. My parents started dropping hints about their own financial pressures: the mortgage that seemed to grow larger each year, the credit card debt from family vacations and home improvements, the reality that their retirement savings were inadequate for their lifestyle expectations. Through all of this, my grandfather remained my sanctuary. Our Sunday phone calls became my weekly therapy sessions, where I could share my frustrations and celebrate my victories with someone who truly understood. "They love you, Emma," he would say about my family, "but they don't understand you. There's a difference. Sometimes I wonder if they love me or just the idea of me." I would reply, "Both probably. But your worth isn't determined by their recognition. You've already proven your value to the people who matter most: your clients, your employees, and yourself." It was during one of these conversations, in late September, that my grandfather mentioned he wasn't feeling well. "Just some chest pains," he said casually. "Probably too much excitement about your latest client win." I insisted he see a doctor immediately. The diagnosis was concerning but not immediately life-threatening: mild coronary artery disease that could be managed with medication and lifestyle changes. However, the doctor emphasized the importance of reducing stress and maintaining regular checkups. I immediately rearranged my schedule to spend more time with him. My team was capable of handling day-to-day operations, and my grandfather's health was more important than any business meeting. My family's response to his health scare was telling. They were concerned, of course, but their concerns seemed secondary to other priorities. Jennifer had carpools and soccer practices to manage. Mark had a part-time job and his music to focus on. My parents had their own routines and commitments. "We'll visit him on weekends," my mother declared, as if once-a-week contact was sufficient for a man facing heart problems. I, on the other hand, began visiting my grandfather 3 times a week. We would have dinner together, watch old movies, and talk about everything from business strategies to family history. These became some of the most meaningful conversations of my life. During these visits, my grandfather shared stories I had never heard before. He told me about starting his business with a $500 loan and a dream. He described the early years when he worked 18-hour days and slept in his workshop to save money on rent. He explained how he had built his company not just to make money, but to create jobs and serve customers. Success isn't just about the destination, Emma, he said during one of these evening conversations. It's about who you become during the journey. He also shared his concerns about the family dynamics he had observed over the years. I love all my children and grandchildren, he said carefully, but I worry that I haven't taught them the right lessons about money and success. What do you mean, Grandpa? I mean that some people see money as something they're entitled to, while others see it as something they need to earn. The first group spends their lives waiting for their ship to come in. The second group builds their own ships. In November, my grandfather suffered a more serious heart attack. This one required emergency surgery and a week-long hospital stay. I immediately took leave from work and spent every day at the hospital, managing his care and communicating with doctors. My family visited, but their visits were brief and seemed motivated more by obligation than genuine concern. Jennifer came twice, bringing the children for short visits that were more disruptive than comforting. Mark visited once, spending most of his time on his phone. My parents came every few days, but their conversations focused more on practical concerns than emotional support. Who's going to manage his finances if he can't? My father asked during one visit. Should we be looking into assisted living facilities? My mother wondered aloud. What happens to his house if he needs long-term care? Jennifer inquired. I was horrified by these conversations. Here was a man who had given so much to his family, and their immediate response to his vulnerability was to start planning how to manage his assets. My grandfather, weakened but still sharp, noticed their attitudes too. Emma, he said during one of our private moments in his hospital room, I want you to know that I've made some decisions about my estate. Grandpa, you don't need to worry about that now. Focus on getting better. I need to say this while I can. I've updated my will. Everything is going to you. I was stunned. Grandpa, that's not. I mean, what about the rest of the family? What about them? Have they earned it? Have they shown they understand the responsibility that comes with wealth? But they're your children and grandchildren too. Yes, and I love them. But love doesn't mean enabling bad behavior. I've watched how they handle money, Emma. I've seen how they treat financial support as an entitlement rather than a gift. You're the only one who has ever created value rather than just consuming it. Grandpa, I don't need your money. My business is doing well. This isn't about need. It's about trust. I trust you to use this wealth responsibly, to honor the values I've tried to instill, and to make decisions that create lasting value rather than temporary pleasure. He recovered from the surgery, but the doctors were clear that his heart was significantly weakened. He would need to be careful, avoid stress, and accept that his active lifestyle was largely behind him. I arranged for a nurse to visit him daily and hired a housekeeper to manage his domestic needs. I also restructured my business responsibilities so I could spend more time with him, visiting every evening after work and spending most weekends at his house. During these months, our relationship deepened in ways I hadn't expected. He became not just my grandfather, but my mentor, confidant, and closest friend. We talked about business strategies, life philosophy, and family dynamics with a candor that was both refreshing and heartbreaking. I should have had these conversations with your parents when they were younger, he admitted during one of our talks. I was so focused on building the business that I didn't spend enough time teaching them about values and responsibility. You can't blame yourself for their choices, Grandpa. Can I? I gave them everything they wanted without requiring them to earn it. I made their lives so comfortable that they never learned to be uncomfortable. That's a failure of parenting. Meanwhile, my family's behavior toward my grandfather became increasingly problematic. They would visit occasionally, but their conversations invariably turned to their own problems and needs. Jennifer would complain about the cost of her children's activities and hint about college fund shortfalls. Mark would mention his struggling music career and wonder aloud about investment opportunities. My parents would discuss their mounting debts and approaching retirement with obvious anxiety. My grandfather noticed all of this, of course. They see me as a problem to be solved or a resource to be accessed, he told me sadly. You're the only one who sees me as a person to be valued. In December, during what would be our last Christmas together, the family dynamics reached a breaking point. We were all gathered at my grandfather's house for our traditional Christmas Eve dinner when Jennifer made an announcement. Tom and I have been looking at private schools for the kids, she said, passing around brochures for expensive academies. The tuition is significant, but we think it's worth the investment in their future. She looked meaningfully at my grandfather. We were hoping the family might be able to help with the costs. Mark immediately chimed in. Speaking of investments, I've been working with a producer who thinks my music has real commercial potential. He wants to help me record an album, but the studio time is expensive. My parents exchanged glances before my father cleared his throat. Actually, we've been meaning to discuss some financial planning with everyone. Our mortgage is becoming challenging, and we're behind on our retirement savings. The subtext was clear. They were all looking to my grandfather for financial assistance. They had turned our family Christmas into a funding request meeting. My grandfather listened to all of this with a neutral expression, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. When they finished their presentations, he simply said, "I'll take everything under consideration." After everyone left that night, my grandfather and I sat in his living room, watching the lights on his Christmas tree twinkle in the darkness. "Did you hear what happened tonight?" he asked. It was hard to miss. 36 years I've been giving them money, Emma. House down payments, car loans, vacation funding, emergency repairs, business investments that never worked out. And tonight, instead of asking how I'm feeling or sharing their genuine gratitude for past help, they presented me with new funding requests. They love you, Grandpa. They just don't know how to express it properly. Do they? Or do they love what I can provide for them? I didn't have an answer for that question. 2 weeks later, on January 8th, my grandfather suffered his final heart attack. I found him in his study, where he had been reading one of his favorite business biographies. He died peacefully, doing what he loved most, learning. The funeral was well attended, reflecting the respect my grandfather had earned in the business community and his neighborhood. His former employees, current and past business partners, and dozens of people whose lives he had touched came to pay their respects. My family, of course, was devastated by the loss. But I noticed that their grief seemed mixed with anxiety about what would happen next. During the reception following the funeral service, I overheard several conversations that confirmed my suspicions. "I hope Robert was thinking clearly when he updated his will," my mother whispered to my aunt. "Emma's been spending so much time with him lately," Jennifer said to a cousin. "I hope she didn't influence his decisions about his estate." "There should be enough for everyone," my father said to Mark. "The house alone is worth over $1 million. Their assumption was that my grandfather's wealth would be distributed among all family members, with perhaps a slightly larger share going to my parents as his children. None of them seemed to consider that their recent behavior might have influenced his decisions. The will reading was scheduled for January 15th, 1 week after the funeral. Attorney Henry Morrison, who had handled my grandfather's legal affairs for over 20 years, would be conducting the proceeding in his downtown office. My entire family attended. My parents, Jennifer and her husband Tom, Mark, my uncle David, my father's brother, and myself. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation. Everyone was dressed formally, as if the occasion required special solemnity, but I could sense the underlying excitement about the inheritance distribution. Attorney Morrison was a distinguished man in his 60s, with gray hair and the kind of calm authority that comes from decades of handling sensitive family matters. His office was traditional and intimidating, with dark wood paneling, leather-bound law books, and a massive oak desk that seemed designed to emphasize the seriousness of legal proceedings. "Thank you all for coming," he began, adjusting his glasses and opening a thick folder. "I know this is a difficult time for the family, but Robert was very specific about his wishes regarding the distribution of his estate." He cleared his throat and began reading in his measured, professional tone. "I, Robert William Henderson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." The legal formalities continued for several minutes, standard language about debts, taxes, and administrative procedures. My family listened politely but impatiently, clearly waiting for the main event, the distribution of assets. Finally, Attorney Morrison reached the crucial section. "As for the distribution of my estate, which includes my home at 247 Beacon Hill Drive, my investment portfolio, my business interests, my personal property, and all cash assets totaling approximately $2.3 million, I leave everything in its entirety to my granddaughter, Emma Catherine Henderson." The silence that followed was profound and terrible. I could hear the tick of the antique clock on the wall, the hum of traffic outside, and the sound of my own heartbeat. No one moved. No one spoke. No one even seemed to breathe. Then my father's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "That's impossible. Attorney Morrison looked up calmly. I assure you, Mr. Henderson, this will is entirely legal and valid. But he can't leave everything to one person, my mother protested, her voice rising with panic. What about his children? What about his other grandchildren? Robert was under no legal obligation to distribute his assets equally among family members, the attorney explained patiently. He had the absolute right to dispose of his property as he saw fit. Jennifer found her voice. This is insane. Emma must have manipulated him. He was old and sick and vulnerable. I can assure you that your grandfather was completely competent when he executed this will 6 months ago, Attorney Morrison replied firmly. I have medical documentation of his mental capacity, and he made these decisions after careful consideration. Mark stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair. 6 months ago? So he planned this whole thing while we were taking care of him. Actually, the attorney continued, consulting his notes, Robert wanted me to read a personal statement he prepared to explain his decision. With your permission, I'll share his words. Without waiting for a response, he pulled out a single sheet of paper and began reading in my grandfather's voice, as if he were speaking from beyond the grave. To my beloved family, I know this decision will be difficult to understand, but I hope you will eventually see the wisdom in it. Over the years, I have given freely to all of you, down payments for homes, funding for vacations, assistance with business ventures, support during difficult times. I did this out of love, but I realize now that my generosity may have done more harm than good. Emma is the only member of this family who has never asked me for money, never expected financial support as an entitlement, and never made me feel like my primary value was my ability to solve problems with my checkbook. She is the only one who visited me during my illness out of love rather than obligation, who celebrated my successes without calculating how they might benefit her, and who understood that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. I am not punishing the rest of you. I am trusting the one person who has proven she can handle this responsibility wisely. Emma, use this money to build something meaningful. Honor the values we've discussed. Take care of those who truly need help, but don't enable those who refuse to help themselves. To everyone else, I love you, but love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their choices. Learn to create value instead of just consuming it. Discover the satisfaction that comes from earning rather than receiving. Build your own legacy instead of living off mine. This decision is final and irrevocable. I trust Emma to handle any family conflicts with the grace and wisdom she has always shown. The letter's conclusion was followed by another crushing silence. I felt numb, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. I had inherited not just money, but an enormous responsibility and a family crisis that would test every relationship I had. My father was the first to explode. This is unacceptable. Robert obviously wasn't thinking clearly. Emma, you have to do the right thing here. What exactly is the right thing? I asked quietly, finding my voice for the first time. Share it, Jennifer shouted, tears streaming down her face. Share it fairly. That money belongs to all of us. According to whom? I asked. According to Grandpa's will, it belongs to me. According to basic human decency. Mark yelled. You can't just keep all that money for yourself. My mother, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. Emma, honey, you have to understand our position. We all loved Robert. We all contributed to his happiness in different ways. It's not fair for one person to benefit from his success, while everyone else gets nothing. What did you contribute to his happiness? I asked, the words coming out sharper than I intended. We were his family, she replied defensively. And what does that mean exactly? Being related to someone by blood automatically entitles you to their money. It means we cared about him. Jennifer insisted. Did you? Because I was the one visiting him 3 times a week when he was sick. I was the one who arranged his medical care, hired his housekeeping, and made sure he wasn't lonely. Where were you? We had our own responsibilities, she shot back. And now you want to be rewarded for prioritizing those responsibilities over Grandpa's needs? The argument continued for another 20 minutes, with accusations flying and emotions escalating. Attorney Morrison finally intervened, reminding everyone that this was neither the time nor the place for family disputes. Emma, he said, addressing me directly, you'll need time to process all of this. The estate will need to go through probate, which typically takes several months. I suggest you take some time to consider your options and make decisions when emotions aren't running so high. As we left the attorney's office, my family surrounded me like a pack of wolves circling wounded prey. They peppered me with demands, threats, and emotional manipulation. "You owe us this, Emma," my father said as we stood on the sidewalk outside the law firm. "We raised you, supported you, loved you." "If you really loved me," I replied, "you would respect Grandpa's decision instead of trying to override it." "This will destroy our family," my mother warned, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "No," I said firmly. "Your reaction to this will determine what happens to our family." That night, I went home to my apartment and tried to process everything that had happened. The weight of my grandfather's trust was overwhelming, but so was my family's immediate betrayal of his memory. Within hours of learning about his final wishes, they had dismissed his judgment, questioned his competency, and demanded that I ignore his explicit instructions. I spent the weekend alone, reading and rereading my grandfather's letter, trying to understand the full implications of his decision. He hadn't just given me money, he had given me a test. How would I handle this responsibility? How would I deal with family pressure? Would I honor his values or cave to their demands? By Monday morning, I had made my decision. I called in sick to work and spent the day implementing a plan that would honor my grandfather's memory while teaching my family the most important lesson of their lives. First, I met with Attorney Morrison to establish a charitable foundation in my grandfather's name. The Robert Henderson Foundation would provide educational scholarships to underprivileged children who demonstrated both academic potential and strong character. I committed $1 million to fund the foundation's initial operations. Next, I contacted the Historical Society about converting my grandfather's Beacon Hill home into a museum dedicated to entrepreneurship and community service. The house would showcase his life story, his business philosophy, and his commitment to creating value for others. I allocated $500,000 for the renovation and endowment of the museum. Finally, I used the remaining $800,000 to purchase a beautiful home in the same neighborhood where my grandfather had lived. I wanted to stay connected to his memory while building my own legacy. The news of my charitable activities spread quickly through local media. The story of a young woman using her inheritance to honor her grandfather's values resonated with people throughout the city. I received dozens of interview requests and speaking invitations. Meanwhile, my family's reaction to these developments was explosive. They called me selfish, crazy, and vindictive. They accused me of wasting money that rightfully belonged to them. They threatened legal action and demanded that I reverse my decisions. But I had learned something important from my grandfather. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior. 2 weeks after establishing the foundation, I invited my family to a dinner at my new home. I told them I wanted to discuss our future relationship and find a way to move forward as a family. They came, I think, because they still hoped to convince me to share the inheritance. They arrived dressed formally, as if they were attending a business meeting rather than a family gathering. My dining room was decorated with photographs of my grandfather throughout his life, as a young entrepreneur, a successful businessman, a loving father and grandfather. On the mantelpiece was a framed copy of his final letter, positioned where everyone could see it. As we sat down to dinner, I began my prepared speech. "I want you all to know that I've thought carefully about Grandpa's decision and your reactions to it. I understand that you're disappointed and hurt, but I also want you to understand why he made the choice he did." I stood up and walked to a flip chart I had prepared, feeling like I was giving the most important presentation of my life. For the past 10 years, Grandpa gave this family over $400,000 in direct financial support. House down payments, car loans, vacation funding, education costs, emergency assistance, business investments. That's in addition to the gifts, the free labor, and the emotional support he provided. I flipped to the next page, which showed a timeline of family interactions during my grandfather's final year. During his illness, when he needed our family most, here's what happened. I visited him 127 times. Mom and Dad, you visited 23 times. Jennifer, you visited 8 times. Mark, you visited 4 times. The numbers hung in the air like an indictment. But it's not just about the visits, I continued. It's about the conversations. When you did visit, what did you talk about? I talked with him about his memories, his values, his hopes for the future. You talked about your financial problems and asked for money. Jennifer started to protest, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. You want to know why Grandpa left me everything? It's not because I'm smarter or more deserving. It's because I'm the only one who loved him without calculating what I could get from him. I flipped to the final page of my presentation, which showed the foundation's mission statement and the museum's dedication plaque. I've used his money exactly as he would have wanted, to create lasting value for people who need help and to preserve his legacy for future generations. The children who will receive scholarships from his foundation will learn the same lessons he taught me. That success comes from creating value, not from demanding entitlement. My father's face was red with anger. You're lecturing us about values while you keep millions of dollars for yourself? Actually, I'm not keeping it for myself, I replied calmly. I've donated or committed every penny of the inheritance to charitable purposes. The only thing I bought for myself was this house, which I purchased with money from my own business. The revelation stunned them into silence. You see, I continued, Grandpa wasn't really testing me. He was testing all of us. He wanted to see how we would react to his decision. Would we respect his judgment or question his competency? Would we honor his memory or fight over his money? Would we learn from his example or ignore his lessons? I looked around the table at each family member. You all failed the test. But it's not too late to learn from it. My mother finally found her voice. So what happens now? Are we supposed to just pretend this never happened? No, I said. We're supposed to build a new relationship based on mutual respect instead of financial dependency. We're supposed to create our own value instead of consuming what others have built. We're supposed to earn our prosperity instead of inheriting it. The dinner ended quietly, with my family leaving in subdued silence. No one apologized, but no one made any more demands either. They seemed to finally understand that their grandfather's decision wasn't going to be reversed, and that their reaction to it had revealed something about themselves they weren't comfortable acknowledging. Over the following weeks, something remarkable began to happen. My family started to change. Jennifer was the first to reach out. She called me 3 weeks after our dinner and asked if we could meet for coffee. When we sat down together, she looked tired but determined. I've been thinking about what you said, she began. About how we talked to Grandpa. You were right, Emma. I was so focused on my own problems that I forgot to ask about his. She paused, stirring her coffee nervously. Tom and I have decided to take out a loan for the kids' school instead of looking for family money. We want to teach them that education is something you work for, not something that's handed to you. It was a small gesture, but it showed she was beginning to understand my grandfather's values. Mark's transformation was more dramatic. 2 months after the dinner, he showed up at the foundation office asking to volunteer. He had shaved off his scruffy beard, traded his torn jeans for business casual clothes, and brought a carefully prepared proposal. I want to teach music to the scholarship kids, he said, his voice more serious than I had ever heard it. I know I've been irresponsible with money and opportunities, but I'm good with children, and music was the one thing Grandpa always said I had real talent for. I was skeptical at first, but Mark proved his commitment. He showed up every day, developed age-appropriate curricula, and connected with the children in ways that surprised everyone, including himself. Watching him work with those kids, seeing their faces light up when they mastered a new song or learned to play an instrument, reminded me why my grandfather had always believed in the power of second chances. Working here makes me feel useful, Mark told me after his first month as a volunteer. For the first time in my life, I'm creating something instead of just consuming it. My parents' evolution was slower, but equally meaningful. My father began attending foundation board meetings as an observer, quietly learning about nonprofit management and community service. He started offering pro bono accounting services to other local charities, discovering that his business skills could make a real difference in organizations that couldn't afford professional financial management. My mother joined the museum's volunteer program, giving tours to school groups and sharing stories about my grandfather's life and business philosophy. She had known him for over 30 years, but had never really listened to his stories about entrepreneurship and community responsibility. Now she was learning about the man behind the money, and she began to understand why his values mattered so much. I'm embarrassed about how we acted, she admitted to me during one of our monthly dinners. We turned your grandfather's death into a grab for money instead of a celebration of his life. He would have forgiven you, I assured her. But more importantly, you've forgiven yourselves by changing your behavior. The most unexpected change came from my Uncle David, who had been one of the most vocal critics of my grandfather's decision. 6 months after the will reading, he approached me with a business proposal. I've been watching what you've done with the foundation and the museum, he said. I want to start a program that teaches financial literacy to low-income families. Would the foundation consider funding it? His proposal was well-researched and thoughtful, focusing on practical skills that could help people break cycles of debt and financial dependency. It was exactly the kind of initiative my grandfather would have supported. Why this program? I asked. Why now? My uncle was quiet for a moment. Because I realized that Robert tried to teach us these lessons, but we were too proud or too entitled to listen. Maybe if other families learn these skills, they won't make the same mistakes we did. A year after my grandfather's death, the Robert Henderson Foundation had awarded scholarships to 47 students, funding everything from elementary school tutoring to college tuition. The museum had become a popular destination for school field trips and business groups interested in learning about entrepreneurship and community leadership. Most importantly, my family had rediscovered what it meant to be a family. Not a collection of people waiting for handouts, but a group of individuals supporting each other's growth and celebrating each other's achievements. Jennifer had returned to school to finish her master's degree in education, inspired by the foundation's work with children. Tom's real estate business was thriving, partly because he had learned to focus on creating value for clients instead of just closing deals. Mark had been hired as the foundation's part-time music coordinator, a paid position that reflected his growing expertise and commitment. He was also taking business classes at night, preparing for the day when he might start his own music education company. My parents had downsized their lifestyle, eliminating unnecessary debt, and focusing on experiences rather than possessions. They were happier and more financially secure than they had been in years. Your grandfather would be proud, my mother said during our family Christmas gathering, the first one we had celebrated together since his death. We were gathered in the museum, which we had opened for a private family evening. My grandfather's portrait hung above the fireplace, and I swear I could see a hint of a smile in his painted eyes. He knew this would happen, I replied. He trusted us to figure it out, even after how badly we behaved. Mark asked, especially after how badly you behaved. Grandpa didn't expect us to be perfect. He expected us to learn from our mistakes and become better people. As I looked around the room at my family, really looked at them, maybe for the first time in years, I saw people who had grown, changed, and discovered their own capacity for creating value rather than just consuming it. My grandfather's inheritance had been worth $2.3 million, but the lesson it taught us was priceless. Money doesn't just reveal character, it can also build it, if you're willing to use it as a tool for growth rather than an excuse for entitlement. The foundation continues to grow, now supporting over 100 students annually. The museum welcomes thousands of visitors each year, sharing my grandfather's story and inspiring others to build their own legacies of service and achievement. And my family? We're closer now than we ever were when money was the primary bond between us. We've learned to value each other for who we are, not what we can provide. We've discovered the satisfaction that comes from earning respect rather than demanding it. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. My grandfather's final gift wasn't just his money. It was the opportunity for all of us to become the people he always believed we could be. If you're facing family conflicts over money, inheritance, or expectations, remember this. True wealth isn't measured in bank accounts or property values. It's measured in the positive impact you have on others and the legacy you leave for future generations. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have shared the money to keep peace in the family, or would you have honored your grandfather's wishes regardless of the consequences? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, money, and the courage to do what's right even when it's difficult. Your support helps this channel reach others who might need to hear these messages. And remember, the best inheritance you can leave isn't money, it's values. The best legacy you can build isn't wealth, it's wisdom. The best revenge you can take isn't hurting those who hurt you. It's becoming so successful and generous that you inspire them to become better people themselves. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.